Hi, everyone. I'm Dino Scaros, and this is SOFIA, the Society of Presidential Historians in Academia. We hope you enjoy today's presidential podcast, and we hope that you like our YouTube channel and subscribe to it. All of that is free. If you're interested in joining SOFIA, which we hope you are, you can scan the QR code that you see here on the screen, and you can visit our website, sophiascholars.com. Today, we are very happy to be here with Donald Stinson, who has quite an interesting and I found entertaining story to tell about his time in the White House. So, Don, if you would be so kind as to introduce yourself.
I'd be happy to. Thanks for having me on today. It's a real pleasure. Um, when I was 17 years old, I literally stumbled accidentally into a job in the White House during the Nixon administration. Uh, Fairly within about a year of of the beginning of Watergate. I was as insignificant an individual as you could be there. I was a college student at American University. I went to school full time and I worked in the White House part time later on full time. But I stumbled into this job as a messenger. I was so dumb when I was 17 years old that I didn't realize for a while actually where I was working. And when someone explained to me that it was the White House, I thought they were kidding me. Actually, what happened was I found I was asked to do something important like clean out an office, and I was cleaning out a desk, and there was all this stationery in there that said the White House on it. And I took it over to, as we had in those days, secretaries and said, "Oh my God, somebody's going to be in trouble. Look what they had in the desk." And she was kind enough not to laugh at me and to explain that at that time, the old executive office building where I worked for a group called the Council on International Economic Policy as a messenger. It was on the second floor of the old executive office building. Now it's called the Eisenhower Executive Office Building. It was actually part of the White House complex. Uh, I worked there for a while until I happened one day to literally, and my life has been just a series of accidents, and most of them happy. Uh, I ran into a guy who was filling up his percolator. You can see how old I am at a water fountain. And I bumped into him. He turned out to be one of Spiro Agnew's speechwriters. And I used to go down, their office was on the second floor of the EOB. And I used to go down and just kind of look because that to me was pretty cool. I mean, he had an American flag and a vice presidential flag in front of the door and a vice presidential seal over the door and guys with guns standing there. I thought that was just the coolest thing in the world. So eventually I got a job working for him, drafting letters to children's groups, things like that, and answering mail. And some of those stories that you can see in the book are outrageous in terms of the things that people actually would send to the vice president of the United States. And I was there when he resigned, and then went back to I went for a while. I was sent to the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, which is now HHS, to work for in a job that was absolutely um, maybe even more meaningless than what I was doing at the White House. And but eventually worked my way back to the White House and ended up spending the rest of my time there during the Nixon and about half of the Ford administration in the East Wing, working both as a messenger and working in the First Lady's press office. But it was none of it was planned. I had no connections except for the old saying, "I knew a guy who knew a guy." and that's how I ended up interviewing there and getting the job. But it was different in those days in terms of hiring someone who was still a month away from his 18th birthday. Um, they Everything was looser then. The Secret Service, everything was much looser than it is today. And I got to. They did a full field investigation on me for the FBI,
Hmm.
which didn't take that long because I hadn't been around that long in life. And but I got to do a lot of interesting things that I wasn't necessarily invited to, but I
Hmm.
stuck my nose into anyway. And I was there at the end with the Nixon administration and the beginning of the Ford administration. So it was very interesting part of
There,
life.
there's so much to get through, and again, I really appreciate you being here. We were talking before this started, and I want to repeat for our viewers. So tell us again the name of your book.
My book is Downstairs at the White House. It's the story of a teenager, an Oval Office, and a ringside seat to Watergate.
And I am an avid reader, and usually, if I'm going to interview an author, I read through the entire book before I speak to the author. I made an exception in this case because I'm enjoying the book so much. And I was telling Don, uh, I know about Nixon, I know about Ford, I know how those stories turn out. So I read those a little more quickly when I go through them. But this is really a story, Don, about your experience. So I don't know how it turns out. And so I'm really enjoying the book. I'm a little more than halfway through it. And it's a great read, and I really recommend it to anyone interested in the presidency.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely.
Now,
So,
here's the thing: when you get down to the end,
mhm.
I'll tell you now. There's a cliffhanger. But if
Oh,
you call me after you're done, I'll tell you where to find the information about that'll explain what happened after in the Oval Office with President Ford.
absolutely, absolutely.
Another one of my many embarrassing stories.
I would I would love to do that. Now, can you tell us the actual, well, first let me clarify for some of our listeners who might not have gotten it. So you worked in the executive office building, which is part of the White House complex. So
Right,
it wasn't as if you were walking into the actual famous White House proper that we know and didn't know where you were. You
right,
were in what looked like an office building.
right.
Got
Uh,
it. Yeah.
that's where I started,
Right.
and I did that for I don't know, a year and a
Mhm.
half, and then moved over to the actual White House, the East Wing, which is of course now gone.
Right. Now, what work can you talk about some of your actual interactions with Presidents Nixon and Ford, even brief ones?
Sure. Well, one thing, and to put it in perspective, the book, at least I tried my best to
Mhm.
make it humorous because it's hard to take a 17-year-old seriously. I left there by the time I was about 20. So
Mhm.
I was not making policy. I was delivering mail and things like that. But
Right.
but I would see the President Nixon on a reasonably uh, frequent basis. Just to give you a lead into it, what I used to do was come in early on the days. I eventually ended up working full time and going to school full time,
Mhm.
and I would go in through the West Gate early in the morning, about 8 o'clock, because that was about the time that President Nixon usually walked from the residence to the Oval Office.
Mhm.
And what I like to do was walk through and say, "Good morning, Mr. President." And that would give me a big thrill for the day and go on.
Sure.
One day,
Mhm.
um, he actually stopped me, which, it was one of those things that it seemed at the time as if time had stopped and nothing was quite real. And the reason he stopped me was because I was carrying a book, and this is all in my White House book. I was carrying a book about Teddy Roosevelt that I was reading for one of my classes,
Mm-hmm.
and he saw the cover of it, and he asked me, how I liked it and what I thought about TR. Now, the reason that he would have stopped me was probably because I was the only thing nearby in his line of sight that had a pulse. He just wanted to talk to somebody. I was of no particular. I mean, it could have been the gardener. It wouldn't have made any difference. But we had a conversation that I don't know how long it lasted. I think when I think back on it, maybe it was 10 minutes, and I mostly listened. But what he did is he talked about Roosevelt,
Mm-hmm.
and as you recall in his speech in the East Room
Yes.
uh, when he left, and he talked about TR. He was a
Mm-hmm.
very big fan of Roosevelt.
Right.
He talked about the fact that Roosevelt had such an all-encompassing view of America. And then he brought in to that Winston Churchill.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this brief period of time, he talked about the fact that, and one of the things I never forget, is that he talked about the fact that why Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, and why Winston Churchill were such great leaders. And the reason that the president pointed out was because they wrote about their countries.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Roosevelt wrote about the West,
Mm-hmm.
and Churchill wrote the history of the English speaking peoples,
Mm-hmm.
and that as a result, they had a view of what the heartbeat was of the nation historically, to be able uh, to lead their countries in a coherent manner. Uh, that was one of the that was probably the single most memorable. I will mention that later on. Of course, in my mind, of
Mm-hmm.
course, after that interlude, I believed I knew the president and that he knew me.
Mm-hmm.
So you think back when you're that age, and so he was getting ready to give a speech in which he talked about releasing the transcripts of the tape.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been over in the EOB, and I crossed the driveway, which is called West Executive Avenue. It's just a area for parking primarily.
Mm-hmm.
And I crossed over, and he was going over to his office in the EOB, and he had the paper around his neck. He had had the makeup put on for television. All that. I walked over, and I had written something for him, and I had it in my pocket where I also had my eyeglasses.
Mm-hmm.
And I took it out of my pocket as I came to him. I said, in infamous words, Mr. President, this is for you. And most of the Secret Service agents I knew, I played poker with them and all this. They slammed me up against the wall so fast and hard it made my head spin.
Huh.
But later on, it had to do with Abraham Lincoln talking about if I have done right or I've done wrong, 1,000 angels on the head of a pin
Mm-hmm.
swearing that I was right or whatever would make no difference. That would actually was later used in one of his speeches, but I don't think that had anything to do with me. Um, the and perhaps my most memorable with Ford
Mm-hmm.
was yet another embarrassing moment. I mean, I did everything fast in those days.
Mm-hmm.
I walked fast. I talked too fast. I did everything. And I was a goofball on a very large stage. I'm surprised the fact that I wasn't fired
Mm-hmm.
is it still amazes me.
Huh.
Uh, on the day that President Nixon had made the decision to resign, uh, I was walking to take something hurriedly over to the EOB. And so I started down the stairway in the West Wing. And as I don't know what it's like anymore, but in those days it had sharp corners around it. And as I came around the corner, I ended up standing nose to nose because of the difference in elevation with Vice President Ford.
Hmm.
Uh, what did I say on a little early? Excuse me, Mr. President.
Huh.
Okay, the agents once again they pin me up against the wall. Stinson, get out of the way, and the whole bit. So that was one of my claims to fame with that. I also memorably um, the Fords were very and the Nixon. I mean, they were extremely nice people. They
Mhm.
very nice to work for, to be around. They were just lovely. And the Fords, shortly after they came into office, had they threw a picnic
Mhm.
for the staff, and I got there a little late, but there was food involved, so I ran as fast as I could to try to get food. And as I'm heading out the door, President Ford comes in, and this is an area that's where the East Wing used to be that leads out to the South Lawn. And he came through the door and stuck out his hand. And he said, "Hello there, young man. How are you?" I said, "Oh, I'm fine, Mr. President." He said, "How do you like your job?" And I said, "I like it just fine. Here's what I do and all that." I said, "How do you like being president?" And he goes, "No, it's not a bad job. It's okay." And that was one of the more memorable conversations. I had the opportunity to speak to him and other presidents as the years went on. I was in the newspaper business, not on the reporting side. I was actually on the marketing side.
Mhm.
But everyone that I had met up to, let's see, Obama, I stopped all
Mhm.
of that activity uh, around that time. Every one of them was extremely nice, very, very friendly, very warm, and I almost unanimously, I would say, more interested in me than in themselves. And I would say that of Nixon, who was made out to be a lot of different things and had become over time, as you know, a cardboard character in a lot of ways, was not that at all. I think in some ways, he was more uncomfortable talking to me than I was standing there with my knees shaking,
Mhm.
listening to him. Um, the same thing with Vice President Agnew, who was much different than people had made him out to be. And President Ford was just as warm as one would have imagined at that time. He was just a great guy.
Sure. Yeah, that's that with all that I read about Ford, that's very true to character. So you've what about Reagan and Bush Senior? Because the reason I bring that up, I once knew a Secret Service agent. I don't recall his name. This is years ago when I was a criminal justice dean in New York City, and I had somebody working for me who was in Secret Service, and he brought this agent in, and I believe he went as far back as LBJ. I don't know if he went to Kennedy, but he went as recent as George W. Bush, the son.
Uh-huh.
And somebody asked, who was the nicest one of all? And they said, Bush the father. So
he,
I was just
he was
curious
I
about.
remember meeting him outside because I used to try to hang out whenever I could outside the Oval Office so I could
Mhm.
watch what was going on, and then see if it matched what was on the Washington Post the next day.
Mhm.
But I met him when he was at that time he was the ambassador to the United Nations,
Right.
and he made you feel just like you'd known him forever.
Mm.
And the same thing with W. And I mean, most of them have been that way.
So it's an understatement to say that you had this experience during some fascinating times where, I mean, you saw Agnew resign, Ford come in as vice president, Nixon resigned, Ford move into the presidency. You talk a little bit about this in the book, how the mood changed from the final days of Nixon to when the Fords came in. So were you in that room when Nixon gave his farewell speech, and what was that like?
Yeah, I was part of the uninvited crowd that went into the East Room, and I remember to paint a picture, it was hotter than hell. It was August, and it
Mhm.
was humid, and that room did not never lend itself to breathable air, and the emotion in the room as President Nixon gave the speech was, well, to say high is an understatement. There were most of the people who had been there that were the political staff. I mean, they had been with Nixon most of their, if not all, most of their careers.
Mhm.
There was a lot of tears. If you look at the old films,
Right.
uh, you see that, and it was in some ways feeling like you were at a funeral in a way, although he tried his best to make it as positive as he could. And I think there were a lot of things that he said in the speech that helped some people get through it, particularly when he said, it's not goodbye, it's au revoir.
Mhm.
We will see you again. Um,
Right.
people who, at least my experience has been that people who have been with those politicians for years and years are very very attached, and so it was it was a very rough time. When I now on the other hand, when I came back in later to see President Ford sworn in, that's why I made a mention of the fact that you could feel the heaviness leave.
Mhm.
All of a sudden everything was lighter. And one thing that I was fortunate to learn as a young man, a very young man, was that life goes on. Uh, that day, August 9th, after those of us well, I was out there on the lawn and seeing Nixon make his famous double V sign and
Mhm.
all that. Later that afternoon, here's what had changed. Pictures that were in the West Wing. There used to be a lot of mostly black and white pictures, big blown up pictures in black frames of the president doing various things that hung in the area uh, relatively near the press room, um, had come down.
Mhm.
But people were on the phone. You could hear typing. There were people on the phone making arrangements for appointments and other kinds of things on Monday. And the work of the government just it continued, which is, I think, an incredible strength of the United States.
Mhm.
It just kept on going, and a few days later, a week or whatever, then pictures of President Ford went up, and it seemed all very natural, all very right. And I spent some time in my career in Russia,
Mhm.
and it's obviously some huge differences in what happened in transfer of power. So,
Right.
but people didn't. The country didn't miss a beat, at least as far as I was concerned.
Sure. So what made you leave? I mean, you were there at the center of power and you saw so much. What made you say, I'm not going to do this for the rest of my life. I'm going to do something else?
Well, um, I had an opportunity to have stayed and eventually hopefully worked my way up in the usher's office,
Mhm.
which the White House is a residence, it's a hotel, it's
Mhm.
an office building, but that didn't hold particular appeal to me um, at the time, and I frankly I needed to make some more money
Mhm.
because I was putting myself through school, and
Mhm.
the government it wasn't even with the overtime it wasn't uh, doing the job. So I went out and ended up going into the newspaper business and circulation in Washington, and did that. But I don't regret leaving. But I was incredibly lucky to have been there at all.
Absolutely. This is the experience of a lifetime. What I would love to do is at some point in the future invite you back because I'm sure there's a lot more we can cover, especially once I get through the book and get to this cliffhanger that you're talking about.
Well,
So,
if if you want to read about how somebody can do something
mhm.
extraordinarily dumb, then you will enjoy that because that was me.
Huh.
Um, and, and actually, just to add one thing to it, these are stories that I told over the years, and I wrote the book
Mhm.
for my grandchildren that one day they would be able to read and see what a character their grandfather was. And then we started, we put it on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and actually people, much to my surprise, bought it and read it. So it can, if you're interested in the book, you can find it on Amazon as low as $3 for an electronic copy. And so it's we had a lot of fun writing it.
That's wonderful, and I've got to say that the $3 for the electronic copy is a steal. I mean, that's incredibly. And I'm a print reader, but the only reason I bought the Kindle version was I wanted to get into it immediately. You know how that works. You click the button and it's in your library and you can start reading right away. But I thought it was great. I wanted to thank you before we close the recording, and I wanted to thank everybody who tuned in to this presentation. And again, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you're interested in joining Sophia, you can go to our website, sophiascholars.com, or you could just scan the QR code here. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you for the next podcast. So long.